This is the Letters to Logos More section. So I'm not just going to read through all the books I listed there. If anyone wants to read any of those recommendations, then please do. I think they're all excellent books. Um, if I had to pick any one book on here or a couple of books that I would put above some of the others, I thought DMT, the Spirit Molecule, was absolutely fascinating. It's one of the strangest, most interesting books I've read. Um, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. I think the first three books in particular. So, A Game of Thrones, A Storm of Swords, and what the hell's the other one? Or that was the third one, wasn't it? The second one was um, Clash of Kings? Clash of Kings. Yep, so it goes Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords. Those three back to back were insane. Some of the best any book I've ever read. Feast for Crows is still good. I like the Feast for Crows. It just gets a little spread out. It kind of slows down. Same thing with the Dance of Dragons. There's some cool stuff that happens in both books. I just feel that they kind of dragged on, and I think the story started kind of getting away from George Martin a little bit. But hey, man, you can't fault the guy. He's an incredible writer. He's got a crazy memory, and like his ability to combine some of the the tropes from medieval history and literature and other fantasy combined with just this sprawling epic that's written very well and it has so many different moving parts. I've never read anything like it, so definitely recommend that one. The Prize by Daniel Jurgen. It's an incredible book. Um, it's basically the history and politics of oil. And when I first say that, you might think, "Oh, I'm not going to read that shit. Why would I read that? That sounds like a waste of my time. I don't care about oil. Oil is evil, this and that." But when you actually understand how it came to be, or how we are where we are now, because of the historical moves by some of these people. Some of these people were rich to begin with. Some of them came from nothing and they worked their way up, and became rich off of oil. It's absolutely fascinating, and the way Daniel Jurgens spins these different characters and makes them entertaining, and also you learn a lot about the history of energy in general, but particularly oil and how it's completely transformed our society. Highly, highly recommended. Um, the Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. I think the book overall is repetitive. I think that Ray Kurzweil could have trimmed that book down to maybe be like 50 pages, 50 to 100 pages, and I think it would have gotten the point across just fine. But the central idea of accelerating returns and how technology is speeding up and it compounds on itself over time, and it's not a linear extrapolation, it's actually an exponential extrapolation. Once you deal with computational type technology, that idea is absolutely was life changing for me because it changed how I looked at everything around me. It changed how I looked at the past, present, and future. It basically gave me a completely different filter in how I viewed the world around me that I didn't have before. So the book I would say was life changing for me just because of some of those new things I learned from that book, even though it's a bit repetitive. Um, Sphere by Michael Crichton. I read that in fifth grade, I think, but I just love that book. I just thought it was absolutely fascinating and it was really suspenseful. I think Michael Crichton's a great author. I think he's a great writer. And I think that book was highly entertaining. It's the best one of his books I read. I also read The Andromeda Strain. I read Terminal Man, and then Congo and Sphere. I never read Jurassic Park. I know Jurassic Park's a good book. I guarantee it's a good book. If I read it, I'm sure I'd like it. You know, the movie that it's based on. I mean, obviously the first Jurassic Park movie was incredible. It was game changing as far as CGI, and so I'm sure the book's awesome too. I'm sure. AC/DC, The Savage Tale of the First Standards War. Tim McNichol. Tim McNichol. This book was just ridiculous. Basically, it talks about the history and the battle between George Westinghouse and um, and Thomas Edison, and just some of the different tactics they used to try and outdo each other. Because George Westinghouse was trying to push alternating current because he thought it was a better technology than direct current, right? So Thomas Edison was pioneering direct current, and he set up a bunch of generators around these different cities on the East Coast, and he was trying to push that as the de facto standard for all electric transmission. So obviously direct current is good, alternating current's good too, but so I have an electrical engineering background, and you have issues with direct current is that once you start sending it long distances, you lose a lot of the energy per length, per distance. So the farther you have to transfer it, you lose more of that energy, and the actual power line as heat. It's basically a heat loss. So with alternating current, you still have some heat loss, but because you can up the voltage so high with transformers, you have a lot less heat losses when you transfer that energy over long distances because you up the voltage so high, so you have less current going through the wire. DC current doesn't have, or didn't have back then, it didn't have transformers. So you basically, at whatever voltage you generated the power at a particular generating station, that's the voltage you sent it out at. And so you have the associated current, and that's where you get the losses. Anyway, I'm just getting a little bit technical, but it's really interesting to see where it comes from. And by the way, DC current now, you can transfer it at high voltages, long distances, because of solid state DC transformers. So it's a newer technology. I mean, it's been around for some time, but it's a bit expensive, and now it's starting to get cheaper. And so it makes more sense to use DC for long distance because you have less losses, but that's a different topic. Anyway, so what's funny about that book is that Thomas Edison was actually insane, like insane in the ruthless way. So he hired this guy, I can't remember his name, but he hired this guy to go around and capture these stray dogs. And what he did is he did public electrocutions, basically to prove out that alternating current, which George Westinghouse was trying to push, was a lot more deadly than DC current, and so people should fear it. So what this guy did that Thomas Edison hired is that this guy would take these stray dogs and he would just shock the crap out of them with direct current for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes until these dogs were almost dead. And he'd say, hey, look, they're not dead, they're fine. See, I didn't kill them. Then he'd take alternating current, zap these dogs until they'd die. And see, look, alternating current is deadly. The dog didn't die with DC current, but it died with alternating current. So we need to push DC current. Everyone should just use that. Don't touch alternating current, it'll kill you. So that was one of the tactics that Thomas Edison employed. At one point, this guy he hired tracked down an elephant, and they did the same thing. They did a public electrocution with an elephant. They did the same thing where they took DC current, shocked the crap out of it until it was almost dead, and then they took alternating current, and they killed it off. So pretty messed up, but you do learn a bit about Tesla because George Westinghouse, obviously, he employed Tesla for a long time, and Tesla it's a very fascinating character that comes out in that book. Nikola Tesla, basically what he would do is when he was coming up with a new invention, he would just kind of go off on his own and just wander off, and he would just be like silent. And he would just think about every single component, screw, bolt, nut, and all the shape of everything that needs to go into like a new induction generator, induction motor. That was one of his inventions. And so he'd go off for like a month or two, and he'd come up with all this stuff in his head, and then he would come back to some of the employees that worked for him, and he would basically dictate verbally exactly how they need to spec out this entire induction motor. And so he'd have his employees just draw it all up, all the way down to the millimeter for each screw and each component. They draft it all up on these drawings, and they build it, and they put it all together, and it worked exactly like Tesla imagined it would work. Like he was on a different level, absolutely. But he was also a little bit crazy. He also found out later that he fell in love with this white pigeon, and then toward like later in his life, he basically started doing everything in threes. And so he stayed at this apartment that had like, I can't remember the number of it, but it's like 369 or something. And then whenever he'd eat food, he'd have 3 forks, 3 spoons, 3 knives, just weird stuff like that. So, you know, the old saying, there's a fine line between genius and insanity. Well, he was right there for sure. What else we got? Speaking of insanity, The Big Sur by Jack Kerouac. I really like that book because you see how the drinking, Jack Kerouac's heavy drinking, started catching up with him in a bad way because he started having some really paranoid, almost like schizophrenic type episodes. Like he was staying out in this cabin with a bunch of his friends, and he was just getting. I don't know if he was like withdrawing. I think he might have been withdrawing, but he'd been drinking so much. He went out in this cabin, and then they were all inside like cooking this meal, and he went outside and he's watching them, and he said they were all like demons and they were trying to kill him and poison him and stuff. So he's like freaking out because he thought his friends were trying to kill him. And can't remember if he was like withdrawing or he was actually still drinking at the time, but it was basically the effects from alcohol that were causing him to think these crazy things that weren't true. And honestly, I can relate to that because I used to drink a lot when I was younger. I'm 36 now. I don't drink anymore. I really haven't drank for a long time, but when I was like in my 20s, I got to the point where I was drinking heavily. I was an alcoholic, and you start thinking some really, really strange things, some really dark things that aren't true. You think about it, internally, but also people around you. You start seeing people around you in a light that just isn't true, and it's not real, and it's always very dark. And I also used to have really bad dreams, when I was hungover. A couple days after drinking heavily, I'd dream about demons and monsters and just really gross stuff. Anyway, that's all behind me now, so that's good.